On April 14, 2003, a decomposed body of a woman missing a head and limbs washed ashore in San Francisco Bay. On the previous day, a decomposed body of a fetus was discovered just a mile away. Based on DNA, the bodies were identified to be Laci Peterson and her unborn son, who had been missing for nearly 4 months. The husband and father, Scott Peterson, was arrested as soon as the bodies were identified, just 4 days later. According to the investigators, Scott had dyed his hair and was carrying multiple cell phones, his brother's ID card, and $15,000 in cash. A little over a year and a half later, Scott Peterson was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death via lethal injection. After 2 appeals, the death penalty was overturned. The conviction remained, but the sentence had changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court remains firm that Scott Peterson is guilty of murdering his wife and child. But there are some who believe that Scott Peterson is innocent. In January 2024, the LA Innocence Project took up his case, stating that there is evidence that can prove it. Does this mean that Scott Peterson is truly innocent? If so, who killed Laci Peterson and her son? Today, we'll take a long look at all the evidence of the Laci Peterson murder, discuss the different theories, and make a conclusion on what most likely happened to the mother and child more than 20 years ago. Scott Peterson met Laci Rocha while both were studying at California Polytechnic State University. They dated for 2 years before getting married in 1997. The couple had a booming business in San Luis Obispo, a sports bar called The Shack. In 2000, they decided to start a family. They sold the bar and moved to Modesto, California, which was Laci's hometown. Scott got a job selling fertilizer, while Laci became a substitute teacher. In 2002, Laci became pregnant. She would give birth in February 2003. Several months later in November, Scott met Amber Frey, a massage therapist, through a friend, and they started dating. Amber had no idea that Scott was already married, with a child on the way. The day before Laci disappeared, December 23, 2002, she and Scott visited her sister Amy at the salon at 5:45 p.m. At the time, Laci was already 8 months pregnant. According to Amy, Laci seemed exhausted from her pregnancy. Amy gave Scott his monthly haircut. During their conversation, Scott offered to pick up a fruit basket for the sister's stepfather at a store called Vela Farms the next day, because he would be playing golf at a course nearby. At 8:30 p.m. that night, Lucy talked to her mother, Sharon, on the phone. The couple planned to come over to Sharon's house for Christmas Eve dinner. Sharon also stated that Laci sounded really tired. The following details in the timeline are based on Scott's version of events, included in his appeal, and details found in court documents. According to Scott, they ordered pizza and watched the movie The Rookie on TV before going to sleep around 10 or 11 p.m. She wore Scott's blue pajama pants to bed. Amy later identified the pants and blouse that Laci wore on December 23rd, which were found inside the house. Laci woke up at 7 p.m. She changed her clothes, putting her blue pajama pants in the hamper. She had already eaten breakfast, cereal, before Scott woke up around 8 or 8:30 a.m. She also ate a piece of toast while Scott ate breakfast. At 8:40 a.m., Laci logged onto the computer while Scott took a shower. She accessed 2 shopping sites before logging off at 8:45 a.m. Based on an analysis of her typical computer use, it confirms it was Laci who used the computer, proving that she was still alive at this point. Between 8:45 to 9:47 a.m., Laci was telling Scott about her plans for the day while he was getting dressed. She planned to walk the dog, go to the store, and make gingerbread at home. She also needed to buy bread for the French toast that was going to be served at their Christmas brunch. The police found a recipe for crème brûlée French toast on the kitchen counter. Scott loaded 3 patio umbrellas from the backyard into the bed of his truck. He was going to put them in his warehouse. A neighbor, Kristen Dempelwolf, witnessed Scott loading the umbrellas. Around 9:48 a.m., Scott and Laci watched the Today Show together before watching Martha Stewart talk about meringue and cookies. It was confirmed that cookies and meringue were mentioned on Martha Stewart at 9:48 a.m. on December 24th. While it cannot be used as proof that Laci was still alive at the time, it does coincide with Scott's account. Afterwards, Scott left the house sometime between 9:49 to 10:30 a.m. He stated that Laci was mopping when he left. He drove to his warehouse, which was just 9 minutes away. During the drive, he checked the voicemail on his cell phone at 10:08 a.m. Cell phone records show that he was near their home at this time. Minutes later, their next-door neighbor, Karen Service, found Mackenzie in the street with his leash on between 10:10 and 10:17 a.m., so she put him back in the couple's yard. Between 10:30 to 10:56 a.m., Scott checked his email, sending one to his boss who had left him a voicemail earlier. He also used the internet to look up instructions on how to assemble a mortiser, a woodworking tool that he had just received via UPS. Computer forensics confirms this. After logging off the computer, Scott cleans up the office and assembles the mortiser. Then he got some tools from the toolbox placed in the bed of his truck. It was during this time that he cut his knuckle on the toolbox. He got a napkin from inside the truck, possibly leaving some of his blood there. Afterwards, Scott decided to take out his new boat instead of playing golf, as he originally planned, because it was too cold. But if that's true, why would he want to be exposed to the cold 40-degree weather in a boat or a windy bay? Not only that, for a spontaneous fishing trip, Scott had done some extensive preparations days before. On December 8th, Scott searched online for fishing supplies and tidal currents around the Bay Area, specifically zooming in on Brooks Island. In addition, he bought a fishing license valid for 2 days only, the day before his spontaneous fishing trip. He told the police that he left a warehouse around 11:18 a.m. and arrived at 12:54 p.m., which was confirmed by the receipt from the boat launch ticket he purchased at the Berkeley Marina, a receipt he presented to the police without having been asked. According to Scott, he took his boat out 2 miles north, arriving near a little island that had trash on it, as well as a big sign that said "No landing." There were also some broken piers on the island. Since he felt the water in the area was shallow, he decided to do a bit of fishing before heading back. When he arrived back at the marina, he was witnessed by some maintenance guys trying to back his trailer down the ramp to load his boat. Scott left the marina at around 2:11 p.m., calling Laci at home and on her cell phone. He left her a voicemail in which he states the time, 2:15 p.m., and that he won't be able to drop by Vella Farms as promised. He also called his friend Greg Reed and his parents on the way home. Scott stopped for gas at a Chevron in Livermore at 3:25 p.m. According to his cell phone records, he called Laci's cell phone again at 3:52 p.m., but leaves no message. He arrives at the warehouse around 4:13 p.m. He goes into the office and sees a fax regarding an incoming shipment. According to the timestamp, it arrived at 11:28 a.m., after Scott had left for the marina. Scott leaves for home, arriving between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m. He goes through the side gate where he sees their dog, Mackenzie, with his leash on. While emptying out the mop bucket near the front walkway, Scott notices Laci's car in the driveway. However, Laci wasn't home. He states that he thought Sharon had picked up Laci and was currently at Sharon's house preparing for Christmas Eve dinner. According to Scott, he undressed and put his clothes in the washer before taking out the pizza box from the refrigerator and milk. He poured himself a glass and took a piece of pizza before heading to the shower. After his shower, he went back to the kitchen and listened to the phone messages. He listened to his own message which he left for Laci, and then heard a message left by Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky. Ron asked if the couple could bring whipped cream over when they come. Scott immediately called Ron and Sharon's home because he had assumed that Laci was there. The call was made around 5:17 p.m. Sharon told Scott that Laci wasn't there. Sharon asked about the dog, Mackenzie. It was during this time that Scott remembered that Mackenzie was still wearing a leash when he saw the dog in the yard. It was at this point that the search for Laci began. Scott talked to Sharon and Ron 2 more times over the next half hour. He started calling neighbors and friends. He knocked on neighbors' doors and even visited the park with Mackenzie to look for Laci. Sharon informed Scott that they would be calling hospitals. By 5:47 p.m., Ron called 911 to report that Laci was missing. 2 detectives from the Modesto Police Department arrived at the Peterson residence after the 911 call. They found Laci's purse in a closet. Inside it were her keys, wallet, and sunglasses. A massive search was conducted the day after Laci's disappearance. There were helicopters, mounted police officers, canine units, and water rescue units. Aside from the police, volunteers also joined the search for Laci. Rewards were offered, posters and flyers were distributed, and a command center was even set up. But it wasn't until April 13, 2003, that a decomposing body of a full-term male infant was found in the marshy area of the San Francisco Bay shore. The next day, a body of a recently pregnant woman washed up on the shore, just a mile away from where the infant's body was found. The woman's body was almost unrecognizable. She was missing a head and arms, as well as most of her legs. DNA testing showed that the bodies belonged to Laci and her unborn son, Connor. Based on the autopsies, Laci had suffered 2 cracked ribs. Her internal organs were missing, except for her uterus. Her cervix was intact. Because much of her body was missing, the forensic pathologist was unable to determine how Laci Peterson died. He speculated that Laci might have been strangled or smothered, but without the head and neck. This theory cannot be confirmed. In addition, the police also did not collect the pillows in the Peterson residence for forensic testing. Unlike Laci, Connor's body was mostly intact, though there was a significant cut on his body. It was also reported that 1.5 loops of nylon tape were found around his neck. The forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson, unrelated, speculated that the state of Connor's body was due to him being protected in the uterus. The nylon around his neck might have become tangled with his body when he got in the water. He believed that Connor's cause of death was due to Laci's death. An expert in fetal growth testified that Connor most likely died on December 23rd or 24th, based on evidence collected from his leg bone. Scott was arrested on the day that the police got the results of the DNA tests on April 18, 2003. He was arrested near a La Jolla golf course where he claimed to be meeting his father and brother for a game of golf. However, he had dyed his hair blonde, and his Mercedes was full of miscellaneous items, including almost $15,000 in cash, 12 Viagra tablets, camping equipment, several changes of clothes, 4 cell phones, survival gear, and 2 driver's licenses, his own and his brother's. According to Scott's dad, Scott borrowed his brother's license the previous day to get a San Diego resident discount at the golf course. He also stated that Scott had been living in his car due to the media attention. However, the police believed that Scott was planning to flee to Mexico. In April 21st, Scott was arraigned on first-degree murder for Laci's death and second-degree murder for Connor's death. He pled not guilty. The trial lasted for 5 months, from June 1st to November 3rd, 2004. Scott was found guilty on both counts on November 12th, 2004. On December 13, 2004, the jury recommended the death penalty. Scott was sentenced to death via lethal injection on March 16, 2005. Since his conviction, Scott has filed 2 appeals with allegations that he did not receive a fair trial. His death penalty sentence was overturned on August 24, 2020, but the conviction remained. On January 18, 2024, the LA Innocence Project took up Scott's case, seeking new evidence to prove that he is not guilty of murdering his wife and son. Which brings us to the big question: is Scott innocent or guilty? To find out, we need to take a look at the prosecution's case. Once it became known that Scott had an affair with Amber Frey, he became the prime suspect in the case. It was later found out that he had engaged in 2 other extramarital affairs prior to his relationship with Amber. According to the prosecution, 2 weeks before Laci disappeared, Scott told Amber that he was a widower, and this would be the first Christmas without his wife. It was speculated that this might have been the time that Scott decided to kill Laci. It's not unusual for a person to kill his or her spouse because they were having an affair with someone. There are hundreds of examples of this. That being said, it's not a definitive indication of guilt. Scott's good husband image may be in question, but there should be more to the evidence than just this. The prosecution also presented that Scott's behavior during and after Laci's disappearance was very unusual. The police, as well as some friends and relatives, thought that Scott was unusually calm during this time. He didn't seem too disturbed that his wife had disappeared. He also continued his affair with Amber. He even called her during Laci's candlelight vigil, telling Amber that he was currently in Paris.
I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal. The crowd is huge.
The crowd's huge?
Frey told police that Scott had said he would be able to spend more time with her after January 26th. During their calls, which were recorded by the police with Amber's help, he read her love poetry, claimed that he didn't want children, and was thinking about getting a vasectomy. That's not all. It was discovered that Scott had lied about his whereabouts that day. A neighbor later stated that when Scott had knocked on his door asking about Laci, he and his wife overheard him saying that he had played golf that day. A relative of Laci's would also testify that when they had gathered at the Peterson residence that night, Scott said he had gone to play golf during the day. If he were innocent, why would he tell people he played golf when he took his boat out? Could he have simply forgotten what he did that day because he was worried about Laci? Or because he didn't want people to find out that he had taken his boat out? Scott also sold Laci's car and bought a new Dodge pickup truck just over a month after her disappearance. Family and friends stated that Laci loved that car, so they couldn't understand how Scott could sell it while Laci's fate was still unknown. Scott also bought a car in his mother's name with cash. When asked about the name, Scott stated that it was the name his parents had given him, much like the song Boy Named Sue. According to Scott, he was doing this because his mother instructed him to. Scott also looked into selling their home, stating that he didn't want Laci to come live in the house again if she's found alive. In addition to all that, the prosecution also claimed that Scott had subscribed to 2 pornographic television channels to his cable service just days after Laci disappeared. While watching porn doesn't mean he's guilty, coupled with everything else, it does make one wonder. Was he not at all worried over his wife's disappearance? Aside from Scott's strange behavior, the prosecution also presented other evidence. 2 hair follicles were found on Scott's boat, one of which matched a hair found in Laci's hairbrush through mitochondrial DNA. However, it cannot be determined when the hair got there. A witness claimed to have seen Laci at the warehouse where the boat was stored the day before she went missing. The police found a homemade cement anchor on Scott's boat. They believe that he had made more than just one, using the anchors to sink Laci's body in the water. According to Scott, he used the remaining cement on the driveway. In addition, the police never found any anchors of this kind in the area where Scott had supposedly dropped Laci's body. Prosecutors also stated that blood was found on the couple's bedspread as well as on the door of Scott's truck. However, the blood on the blanket was found to be Scott's. In addition, the blood on the truck was due to an injury Scott had gotten while building the new woodworking tool in his warehouse. While the police surmised that Scott had killed Laci at home, they believed that he used a mop to clean up the crime scene. However, they never found evidence of any kind inside the house that indicated someone was murdered there. Last but not least, a hydrologist testified that it's probable that Laci's body was dropped into the water in the area where Scott Peterson said he was fishing. Now, all of these are just circumstantial evidence and doesn't really directly tie Scott to the crime. He might just be taking advantage of his wife's disappearance to live the life he wanted. That's not an indication of guilt, more like scum-like behavior. And that's not enough to convict someone of murder. Some believe that Scott couldn't have committed the crime because Laci was seen by several witnesses walking the dog. Mike Chiavetta, one of the Petersons' neighbors, states that he saw the dog Mackenzie at around 10:45 a.m. Another witness, Homer Maldonado, states that he saw Laci and her dog between 9:45 and 10 a.m., 3 blocks south of the Peterson residence. 3/4 of a mile from the Maldonado sighting, another couple witnesses a pregnant woman and her dog walk by. This time, it was between 10 and 10:30 a.m. The problem with these sightings is that it conflicts with both Scott's and Karen Service's account. Laci was supposedly watching Martha Stewart at 9:48 a.m. She couldn't have been walking the dog, as the witnesses have claimed. Moreover, Karen had already returned the dog to the Petersons' yard by the time they claimed to have seen Laci and her dog. As to whether Laci had walked the dog after Scott had left the house, it's still up for debate. According to her doctor and others, Laci had already stopped walking the dog due to her pregnancy. More importantly, the witnesses who claimed to have seen Laci saw her wearing black pants, the same clothes that Scott had described Laci was wearing when she left the house. However, Laci's body was found wearing khaki pants. Now, let's say that Scott had murdered Laci and dumped her body in the bay. It would only be possible if Scott had placed Laci in the back of his truck and then transferred the body onto his boat. However, there was no room in the warehouse for him to put his truck inside and close the warehouse door. He would have had to transfer her body to the boat in broad daylight for the whole world to see. Is it simply because of a lack of direct evidence that the LA Innocence Project is taking on his case? Well, their theory is that the actual perpetrators are the burglars who robbed the house just down the street from the Peterson residence. According to Scott and his advocates, Donald Pierce and Stephen Todd robbed a house of the Medina family on the morning of December 24th. Laci was walking the dog when she came across the burglars in the middle of the robbery, so they killed her. The theory is that they waited for several days before dumping the body, where Scott went fishing in order to frame him. Diane Jackson, one of the Petersons' neighbors, reported that she saw 3 men loading a safe in a van in front of the Medina home the morning Laci disappeared. According to the Medina family's cell phone records, they didn't leave the home until around 10:33 a.m. This means that the burglary could have happened after Scott had already left the neighborhood. The Petersons' postman, Russell Graybill, told police that he had delivered mail to the Peterson residence sometime between 10:30 to 10:50 a.m. on December 24th. The dog Mackenzie would usually bark at him wherever he may be on the property. That day, he stated that not only did Mackenzie not bark, the gate was also open. This was 15 to 30 minutes after Karen Service put the dog back in the yard and closed the gate. If what Graybill said was true, then it's possible that Laci did take the dog out for a walk. Of course, it's also possible for the dog to have escaped. Karen Service testified that she had found the dog loose in the neighborhood a number of times before. So it isn't out of the realm of possibility that Laci encountered the burglars as she was walking the dog. Moreover, on December 25, 2002, a burned-out orange van was discovered near the home. It contained a blood-stained mattress. DNA testing of this mattress could link Laci's murder to the burglary. Take note that the burglars were investigated by the police, and according to them, they didn't break into the Medina house until the 26th of December. Granted, they could be lying. So, is Scott Peterson guilty or innocent? A person can only be considered guilty in court when the proof provided convinces the jury beyond reasonable doubt. There's no question that the public was highly suspicious of Scott Peterson. After all, the first person everyone first suspects is the spouse. In addition, Scott did and said a lot of questionable things. But is all the evidence enough to convict him of murder beyond reasonable doubt? Scott Peterson is a liar and a cheat. And it's highly possible that he did murder Laci and their son Connor. But we can't state that we're 100% certain that he did it. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.